Welcome to Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. Learn firsthand from business owners who've built successful ABA businesses. Utilize proven techniques and strategies to help your practice thrive. This is Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast with Jonathan Mueller.
My name is Jonathan Mueller. I'm the host of Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. And my guest today is Derek Lowe. Derek is a CEO and founder of Medallion, the first solution for healthcare companies to fully offload clinician contracting and credentialing operations. Medallion's mission is to remove as much regulatory complexity as possible so customers and their providers can focus on what they do best, providing care to patients. Derek holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science and Statistics from Yale University, and has been named Forbes' 30 under 30. Derek, welcome to the pod, dude.
Thank you for having me.
We have to start, Derek, with like our current healthcare, and I mean broader healthcare insurance contracting and credentialing system. It's fucked up, man. There's so much complexity. It takes too long. It's super inefficient. No visibility. Like, how do we get to this point in our healthcare system?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks again for having me on here. Very excited to be here. I think that there's really obviously a multitude of reasons for this, and I don't think we would, in even an hour get to all of them. But I think that really fundamentally one of the reasons that it's so complicated is a few things. One is regulation. Obviously, healthcare is highly regulated, and that makes sense, right? You don't want doctors, who are treating patients doing open heart surgery, or you're working with people's lives here, right? And so it's obviously, it makes sense that you want them to be legitimate doctors. You don't want them to be faking it until they make it. It's really important that there's a really high level and high bar of compliance and regulation. So I think that fundamentally is important, right? Everybody talks about regulation as a bad thing. I think first and foremost, we view regulation as a good thing. I think the problem is just when that regulation is not carried out efficiently and effectively, right? So another core reason that in our view, healthcare is so complex is that there's all these different stakeholders, right? There's there's folks like you all on the provider group side. There's there's obviously the insurance payers. There's the government. There's the providers. There's actual end patients, and there's so many different stakeholders within the healthcare ecosystem. So that obviously that's a layer of complexity. It's like regulation, lots of stakeholders, and then there's been a real lack of adoption of technology, and so that actually is what has led to all of this red tape being, just so difficult for all these different stakeholders to keep up with, right? Because people opted and chosen to solve all of it through manual labor and processes and workflows that end up just being inefficient, right? So you've got just a massive labor force, right, in the U.S. in terms of just overall U.S. healthcare, right, that is doing things that ultimately, machines have been able to do for a long time now. And our view of the world is that we want to be able to, first enable that workforce to be more efficient, so to provide them the tools and software to actually operate and be more effective at their jobs and to really serve them. And I think ultimately, as healthcare continues to evolve, a lot of that will become fully automated, and there will be a shift, more and more to have that workforce upskill and uplevel themselves and shift more of that work to be automated. And so I think, that's our view of the world. That's how we kind of, how we rationalize why, healthcare is so complex and inefficient, and why there lacks a lot of visibility. And so I think it's a really great topic, and something that we wish more people would be talking about, because the total spend every year is literally $1 trillion, which to put it into perspective, right? All of U.S. healthcare is $4 trillion, and if you rank countries by GDP, it's literally the fifth largest country. So that was a pretty wowing stat when we first heard it, and it really puts into perspective just how big of a problem this is.
That's a mind-blowing stat, Derek. And I want to emphasize something you described, this idea of like consumer protection, right? There are important reasons regulations exist. And so I'm passionate about ensuring consumers have the best protection. You know what was like the shocking realization for me some years ago, like to this point, is at least in the autism services, the ABA field, there's this extraordinary supply demand imbalance, right? There's so many, 1 in 44 kiddos now are diagnosed with autism. We don't have enough BCBAs and RBTs and psychologists and others to serve them. And yet credentialing could take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months. It was actually regulation like over corrected for consumer protection and led to potentially fewer kiddos getting services as quickly. And so I'm curious, like, have you had a shocking revelation, or what's like one of the more shocking things you've learned about our healthcare system?
Yeah. Well, first, yeah, I mean, that is obviously super surprising. I think our version of that is probably just very similar to what we just talked about, just the sheer amount of admin work that there is. I think there's one thing to think about it from a top-down view, right, which is obviously what we just talked about in terms of $1 trillion of spend. That's obviously shocking, but it's also a little bit hard to, I think, actually understand what that means, just because it's such a big number. So I think actually the bottoms up version of that is actually probably one of the most shocking things that I learned, which is that doctors, and this is data from that the AMA reported a few years ago. Primary care doctors are spending about 50% of their workday every single day on a combination of EHR tasks and a whole host of other admin work.
Stop it.
Yeah, 50%.
Oh,
and you just think about how much time and money and energy they've invested in their training, medical school, residency, and for them to be then spending 50% of their time on actually like essentially administrative work. And I think some fraction of that is legitimate. Again, like they need to see a patient, take the notes,
sure.
chart, but 50%, obviously, I mean, that's literally 4 hours of a workday, or maybe for a doctor, they work maybe 10, 12 hours. That's a lot of time that they could be seeing other patients. And you then multiply that by, obviously the million doctors that exist in the US. And I mean, that's just an enormous amount of time every year that, is being spent on admin.
Dude, a small part of me just died, Derek, when you quoted that 50% stat. I'll be honest. Like the old adage is like, doctors should spend time with patients, not with their EHR, right? And yet
Yeah.
it hasn't totally been solved for. Tell me about like the specific moment you realized you needed to start Medallion.
Yeah. So the kind of longer version of the founding story is I started a company actually before this in the ed tech space. And we ended up selling that company a few years ago. So it was acquired. And I knew I wanted to start another business. And so I was evaluating a few different ideas, one of which was in the healthcare space, actually completely unrelated to Medallion. It actually came to me from watching actually a Netflix documentary called Diagnosis, which I highly recommend if folks in your audience haven't seen it. It's by a Yale professor by the name of Lisa Sanders, and she's a pretty inspiring person. She's a physician and has written a column for the New York Times for many years called I think it's called it's something to do with diagnoses. But the point of the column is really interesting, which is she writes about these very rare cases of diseases or ailments and that doctors have not been able to easily diagnose. And and so essentially she'll write about the case and then the next day reveal the diagnosis. But what's really fascinating about the show is that she actually partnered with the New York Times and Netflix to create this really fascinating show where she essentially for each episode took a rare disease patient that had not been diagnosed by anybody yet, and actually crowdsourced from the New York Times readership essentially the diagnoses for each person, which was each episode of the show. And I just found that so incredible because in some cases, without spoiling the show for those who actually want to watch it, if she was actually able to help people and in one case, actually able to get a diagnosis, and then ultimately help them get treated and get better. And so that was just like this really inspiring thing. And I was like, this is kind of amazing. Is there a way that you can productize this and scale it? And so I actually reached out to her, because I also went to Yale, and so through that connection, thought that maybe she'd be open to chatting. And lo and behold, she actually responded, which was very nice of her, and we talked for several months. And so actually, I flew out to New York to take a train to Connecticut to meet with her, and we were talking about this idea. I still think somebody should do it, but essentially on that trip, I also met with then acquaintance, now friend, Zach, who's the CEO at Row, and essentially was actually talking to him about that diagnostic idea. And in the last 10 minutes of our conversation, I just kind of asked him, unrelated to all this other stuff, what are some pain points you've experienced scaling Row? And that's when he went on this rant on medical licensing, and just talked about how much of a pain point it was for them in the early days, and it just got me very excited about the opportunity to be able to streamline and optimize a process that is very efficient, very archaic, but so core to the U.S. healthcare system, right? Like we talked about at the very beginning, regulation is a good thing. You want your doctor to be licensed. You want them to have gone through rigorous training. But you don't want them to have to spend tons of time on actually getting the license. The process of verifying and credentialing them should actually be efficient, and it should be straightforward. And so that's what we're working on tackling. And it's obviously a universal problem across every company that wants to do telehealth in the country. So yeah, we're now the market leader in offering medical licensing services, and yeah, with that was the moment that I realized I thought Medallion could be a big business, and that it would really help people through our ability to serve these companies that are doing amazing things for patients.
Mm. All right, you just blown my mind again. The idea that Diagnosis, the Netflix documentary, which I'm going to drop a link to in the show notes. I have not yet seen it. This is like the confluence of entertainment and diagnostics, like medical practice, and so many things. That's like this is where the future is going. That's super cool. But the other thing I want to pinpoint about what you did as an entrepreneur that's so critical, it's easy to think as entrepreneurs, I want to go find a shiny solution or product or something else. But what you did was fell in love with a pain point, and you asked your friend Zach, like, what? All right, where is their pain? And I think this is a really this is a fundamental part of creating products, services, organizations that our world needs. Find a pain point and then just go solve it. And clearly, there's a huge one. So that's a cool takeaway, Derek. But how would you describe where contracting and credentialing sit in this broader framework of healthcare compliance?
Well, so I guess firstly, I'd separate out contracting from credentialing. I mean, they're kind of two separate processes. When we think about contracting, that's really the step of establishing a business arrangement between a health plan and a provider group, right? That states how they will work together, the financial terms of the engagement with each other, in terms of say like the fee schedule, right? So that the payer and the provider group agree on how much the payer will reimburse for various treatments and procedures. And so that's what we view as the contracting process. And I think the purpose of that in the market is to just like be able to establish those connections. And I think credentialing obviously we view as a compliance activity, and health plans, they want to ensure that the providers on their network are legitimate. And so there's various standards for credentialing, one such as NCQA, of which Medallion, for example, got an accreditation from NCQA, so that any other party now knows, okay, Medallion has been certified, and executes this credentialing process in a compliant way according to NCQA. And so that means we run our education and training verifications, and like malpractice claim history verifications and license verifications in a procedural way that they've actually audited. And so again, like looping back to this theme of like compliance and regulation being a good thing, we do ultimately think that some form of credentialing is absolutely necessary and beneficial for the quality of care. Now, I think where things break down is that there's so much duplicative work happening, and in plans, let's say that as a MD, you're in 20, 30 plans, which is like about the average in the U.S. is one MD is typically in network with about 30 plans. Now all of a sudden they're having to actually go and be credentialed 30 times, right? And that's obviously unnecessary. If they've been credentialed once and it's done in a NCQA compliant way or through any other framework that has been audited and is quality, there shouldn't be the need for them to then have to be credentialed another 10, 20 times, right? Maybe even more. So I think that's both the good and the bad, right, of credentialing. Mm-hmm. And for organizations that employ providers, right, they then take on the responsibility of credentialing, and it's their reputation and business on the line, and that's where Medallion's able to help. And I doubt most people realize, but this process is typically very manual, and so that's where we've been able to invest in technology to actually be able to automate and make it more streamlined.
Well, in full disclosure, Derek, or full disclosure to our audience, I should say, Medallion and Element have inked a partnership where we, as a revenue cycle management, billing and insurance service provider to the autism services field, we are working with you all to take advantage of both the regulatory sort of the best of this, right? Making sure that we are absolutely compliant going through the credentialing and separately contracting process, but also make sure it's as efficient as possible so we can get as quickly to those getting services. So this is the future, like full stop. Tech enablements like what Medallion's doing and these kinds of partnerships are the future of a world in which patients will demand value. Right? Not just like more procedures, not just more billable hours, but they'll actually demand value. What are your thoughts on how Medallion helps move healthcare providers toward and be successful in a value-based care world?
Yeah. Well, first, I completely agree that, just on your point that, this is the future. And of course, we are, very excited to be in partnership with you all. I think that, one is that health tech is really the future of patient care. At the core, we're seeing healthcare become a more consumer-forward industry than ever before. And it really does put them in the driver's seat to demand care in the way that they want to consume it. And I believe that the value-based care model does truly support this evolution, while also adding value and empowering providers and their employers to put preventative care first. The healthcare Payment Learning and Actions Network's latest APM measurement report showed that nearly 41% of U.S. healthcare payments, which, by the way, represents approximately 238 million Americans and over 80% of the covered population, actually stemmed from value-based reimbursement models last year. So it's taken us a while to get here, and the process has been especially slow, especially over, of course, the last couple of years with COVID. But we're seeing traditional Medicare and Medicare Advantage lead the value-based reimbursement charge, with commercial players lagging behind, but still meaningfully are contributing. And so Medallion helps those organizations and those providers who are committed to value-based care to be successful by quickly enrolling them, their providers with plans, setting up delegated agreements, or handling the credentialing process end to end. So we're indirectly involved here, but we're helping to power those provider networks and organizations that are committed to value-based care, like Oak Street Health or Homeward, just a couple of our clients that are really taking this on and leading the charge.
Wow, over 40% of services are delivered currently in our country, or as of last year, in a value-based reimbursement model. What's so mind-blowing about that is, and just look at the applied behavior analysis ABA field, which is like a $4 billion sector of healthcare. Like, this is meaningful dollars, like 7,000 different ABA practices. And though value-based care is, more and more people are hearing about it, there's still a lot of, well, sort of hemming and hawing around how do we define outcomes and how do we figure out how to move this model and how quickly or slowly. And yet, as like patients ourselves, like 40% of us are getting healthcare services through a value-based model that like we don't necessarily see. So I think that's really like, that's pretty phenomenal, man. And to this point of we are moving, hopefully, as a country in our healthcare practice to being more consumer friendly and consumer forward, right? Making healthcare services easier to access. And there's lots of examples of this, of healthcare providers going to families' homes, right, instead of making them come to hospitals or urgent cares. Um, and in fact, I've done like presentation CEU events before on how like healthcare fields should be more like Disney World, right? We should think about the consumer and the patient experience. And yes, a big part of that clearly is diagnosis, outcomes, treatment, et cetera. And a big part of it is how do you feel about the services you're getting? And it's just taken like, it feels like it's going to take quite some time further to move us there, but it has to happen, right? But I'm curious, like, to pivot a little, like to be an entrepreneur is to be just a little bit crazy, right? I mean, you seriously, like, you have to convince the world that there's this need out there that hasn't been met, and you're going to meet that need through something that poof doesn't exist, and you're going to put it out there. And so I mean, I feel batshit crazy in like the 3 different entrepreneurial endeavors I've had in my career. But have you ever felt crazy over the course of your medallion, or a couple times over entrepreneurship journey, and how do you push through that?
Yeah, honestly, like I don't think I ever felt crazy. I probably wouldn't put it that way. Like I think that every person that's tried to start a business, whether it's a small business and a coffee shop, or it's becomes a titan like a Google or an Apple, I think that I would bet a lot of money that every single person that's tried has at times felt like it wasn't going to work, or felt like just badly, that there's some big problem or some big thing is going to happen that's going to kill the business or impact it very negatively. And had really good days, and had days where it felt like the coffee store is going to become the next Starbucks. And I think that I think for me, having done this twice now, the first time being at a much smaller scale, um, and with this one now, on the early path to us scaling to be a bigger business. I think that keeping a level head is something that I'm constantly trying to practice, and to celebrate the wins and to feel good about them,
Hmm.
but not overly celebrate and not get overly confident. And likewise, for the losses, there's growing pains that every company goes through, and
Hmm.
we've experienced our share, and every company, no matter how big or small, I think goes through those ebbs and flows. I mean, look at even a Meta, from Facebook, right? Um, I mean, I think even them, they've gone through this, very challenging and difficult time, and I'm sure that wasn't easy for a lot of the folks there. Even at a half a trillion, market cap, or whatever it was. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the short answer of it.
Hmm.
And I think ultimately, yeah, like there have definitely been times during Medallion and in my past company where there have been bad days, and it's felt like, is this really going to work? And so yeah, I think that that's part of the process.
Derek, one thing I've reflected on as an entrepreneur, it's really hard to be a perfectionist as an entrepreneur, right? Because in creating something special, right, this service or a product of value, whatever it is, you've got to be constantly hypothesis testing. And so one way, I mean, our relationship with Element and Medallion over the last, gosh, 6 months now has been exactly that. And so I don't know if you've read Good to Great by Jim Collins. That's like one of my all-time favorite like Bibles of business. And I think it's in that book, maybe it's in one of his others, but it talks about this idea of organizations that are successful. You shoot BBs, then bullets, then cannonballs. And what Jim Collins means by that, and I think this was the approach, we put you all through your paces, I know, when we embarked on the partnership earlier this year, but is like test something a little, right? And that's with Element and Medallion was like going through and seeing the demos and seeing, hey, can this actually meet like the variety of our requirements? And then shooting bullets is like sign up for a pilot project and run that for some number of months to say, okay, yep, we're validating what we initially saw. And then the cannonballs are like, are big. We know this works. We know this is the future, and we're going to double down on it. We're going to place that bet. But it seems like that's what entrepreneurship is, right? It's that constant testing and then sort of doubling down on the things that go well versus if stuff isn't working, which is going to happen all the time, you got to kill it, right? And you've got to move on. You got to like rinse and repeat. I don't know. Does that ring true for you around how this idea of hypothesis testing in startups?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense. I like that framework as well. I think there's a lot of those, right? Like the crawl, walk, run one, is I think another framework. So yeah, I mean, I think like momentum is really important. Like, just being able to get the ball in motion, and like the snowball analogy, I think is like actually just like such a good one for building businesses. Like as you keep, rolling down the hill, as long as you kind of like, rolling the snowball in the right way and not, running into a big tree that, explodes it. It kind of just like keeps adding and growing and getting bigger and bigger. And eventually, when it is at the bottom of the mountain, it's huge. So I think, yeah, it's been interesting as we've built Medallion to see things like that, and yeah, I think there's reputation now, right? Like people know about us because we've got over 250 customers, and that's going to continue to grow, and it starts to just compound, and you raise another round of financing, and then now you've got more more staff, then that allows you to grow more and serve more customers. Then it's like this cycle. So yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense to me.
That's cool. I like the snowball analogy. ABA practice owners, are billing and insurance issues getting you down? Well, let me tell you, Element RCM is your answer. Element provides world-class revenue cycle management services, contracting, credentialing, authorizations, billing, and more. Element's your partner, so you can focus on what you love to do, providing the highest quality services to your families and clients. Element's a preferred partner of the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, and its founders have nearly 20 years of experience owning and operating successful ABA organizations. They understand you. They know that every dollar counts, that integrity is everything. Element works with any practice management system, and Element's not a vendor, they're your partner. So find out more and take a free revenue cycle assessment at elementrcm.ai. So right now, the provider world, at least, healthcare providers, it's like trench warfare, competing for talented team members and employees. I can only imagine how much harder, or I would guess it might be in Silicon Valley, right? Competing for the best in tech talent. Like, what have you done to attract and retain world-class people?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. Like one is, I'm based in Silicon Valley, but our team is fully distributed. So we have almost 200 employees, and they're all across the country. So I think that's been one thing, right? Is just like fully remote. We were founded, like a week before the lockdown happened in across the states because of COVID. And so we had no choice but to build remotely. In fact, actually, our two first, real team members, they were actually engineers in the Ukraine. And so we've actually built a small Ukraine team. And that's been a whole nother, kind of thing, just obviously with the war going on there. But I mean, they've been with us since the start, and every single one actually that joined Medallion along the way from Ukraine is still with us. So we've got a really strong team there. Yeah. But I think, like in terms of attracting top talent, I think it's a few things. Like one is just word of mouth, like what it's like to work here. I think like, we've got a lot of referrals, right? People like working here. They refer their friends, people they know that are great. So we've grown a lot through referral. And that's been a great strategy. I think, top venture firms, that's another one. We've brought on board, Sequoia Capital, Google Ventures, Spark Capital, Optin Ventures, I mean, these are some of the best, investors in the entire world. And having, their logos on our website and Crunchbase, and people knowing that we're backed by them, that's good signal as well. And I think that does mean something. Um, and then I think when it comes to retaining talent, we could talk about that for an hour, but I think it comes down to building a really good culture, and that I think starts with the leadership team and how the leadership team operates, um, and how they carry themselves. I think that then trickles down to the rest of the company. But I do think we've built a really strong culture and a durable one that has so far served us really well. And we've had, just like any business, our share of challenges, and it's been on across the board on different areas. And as a team, we've been able to rally together to solve them. And I think it's because we've built a really strong group of people that really care about their work and have a strong work ethic, and want to do great work. And I think that it's just really important to find folks like that, because it is really hard. It's really really
Mhm.
tough to find people like that. And I think we've gotten very lucky in a lot of accounts.
So I'm kind of blown away this idea that I mean, you started Medallion a week before the lockdowns. I mean, there's a laundry list of challenges that any entrepreneur faces. There is a very select few subset of like startup companies that add global pandemic and shutdowns in the beginning. But I think you're right. Like it's almost an unfair advantage being able to source talent like across the country and across the world as you describe. All the way to Ukraine. And I want to reinforce, like, so my listeners might not be aware of some of the names you described, but that those your investors are absolutely a list of a list. The Google Ventures, Sequoia, Optum Ventures, which by the way, like United Healthcare, right? That's another separate offshoot, and they're distinct and separate, right, from the healthcare side. But the fact that they've made investment means they've seen the future too, right? And you talk about this idea of like go to where the smart money is. Like this is the smart money, and so I think that's really powerful stuff. It, and you talked about like the importance of building out leadership, right? Leadership teams, and I've always it felt like one of the hard things for leaders and founders, and what takes vulnerability is to start as you're growing, and you're hiring more people and doing much broader work. Like there's a lot of vulnerability in building a C-suite around you, leaders of people who, like, frankly, are smarter than you are. Or at least, like, when I try to, people who are smarter than I am. Like, how did you approach building out your leadership team?
Yeah, I think we got really lucky here, honestly, and it was through just network, honestly. I found one person through the Y Combinator network. We're not a YC company, but my last one was, and so still had access to the network and found something through there. Um, Other folks who really were from referral. One person um, came through a referral of one of from another person that we had just hired
Mm.
to our leadership team. So um, yeah, it's been I think, and we've gone through a couple of folks that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And um, yeah, I think like the team we've got right now is really rock solid. And yeah, and like I think I don't think I have any, honestly, anything super interesting to comment on this one, because I do think it was just so much luck and through network and bringing people in. But yeah, I think that building out leadership team is by far one of the absolute most important things to get right, because yeah, we've seen what happens when you get it right, and we've seen what happens when you get it wrong. And
Hmm.
um, it's better to get it right.
Absolutely. That whole slow to hire, fast to fire, right, is
Yeah.
critically important. Coming back to what you described earlier, like culture is everything, especially when it comes to retention. So, hey, I have to say, congratulations. You recently closed on I think it was a $35 million Series C round, which means now you've gotten multiple rounds of investment from your VC partners. So that's pretty extraordinary. And so I'm curious, as an entrepreneur, what is like a successful exit to you mean these days? 5 years ago it was all about the unicorns, right? Those with $1 billion valuation. Now, what is it about the decacorns? $10 billion. Otherwise, it's not interesting. I don't know, but what is success look like to you, Derek?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for that. Yeah, I think we got again, very fortunate timing to raise when we did. In terms of success, I mean, I think, really it's two things. One is, continuing to build the business in a way that is best for our customers, because at the end of the day, we are customer first, and we want to do what's right for them. And then I think the second is to just maximize value, and just overall enterprise value for our shareholders, and that's myself, it's the team, it's our investors. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's any particular um, mark that we're trying to hit from a outcome standpoint. I think that we're trying to just focus on delivering amazing value for customers, and we know that the rest comes. Like, sometimes candidates will ask, are you looking to build a business to be an independent public company, or to get acquired? I think, like, the answer that we always give is we're looking to build a long term. We're long term oriented, and we're looking to invest and make the right investments to just deliver well for our customers. Because at the end of the day, whether you reach a $20 billion acquisition like Figma to Adobe, or you end up as a public company like a DoorDash or a Zoom, or and any of these other just amazing businesses. I think the only thing that is most important is that the customer that is consuming the product, continues to get the value they need, and at the end of the day, that's the sole purpose of a business, right? So that's how we think about it.
It's so true, dude. Right? 'Cause there's so much noise out there around whatever artificial goals there are, and I love how you describe that. It all comes back to how do you best serve your customers, right? Or how are you building the business in a way that best serves them? I think that's powerful. And to your earlier point around you fundraise, or you close that round at a good time. Like, it's scary right now to fundraise. Tons of VC-backed companies have seen slashed valuations. We saw a huge first unicorn in ABA. I go through some super turbulent times this past summer. So people are laying off staff. They're doing anything they can to get to profitability. So, like, the scariest thing to me in thinking about being a VC-backed company is this idea of having a cash burn rate, right? You just have this, like, ticking clock to when the end is over, because you run out of cash. And tell me about, what was that transition for you like, going from that traditional sort of almost pre-2022 mentality of just grow at all costs to, hey, we've got to grow profitably and sustainably?
Yeah, obviously, very timely topic that a lot of folks are interested in, I think, talking about. We have not operated in a way that's ever been unsustainable. I think we've always tried to keep a very level head about hiring, our burn rate, being well capitalized. At the end of the day, it's my job, right, as a CEO, to ensure that the business has the capital that it needs to continue running, and building in the way that we want. And so, that's arguably, like, my most important job. Or of the various duties that I have, it's kind of it's definitely at the top of the list, or if not number one, very close to it. And so, yeah, I mean, right now we've got really healthy amount of runway. We haven't had to do any rifts or layoffs, and we're probably honestly slightly more focused now on cost than we were in 2021, but nothing's meaningfully changed about how we're operating the business, because we're still growing well, and have a really healthy amount of runway. And so, we're, again, just, I think right now, still very much optimizing for growth, but not growth at all costs. I think that's maybe the key differentiator.
Yeah, huge and well said. Like, your fiduciary responsibility as a CEO is to ensure you've got the capital you need to fully carry out through the next milestone and the mission you've signed up for. Well, one thing, Medallion recently, and you recently hosted the Medallion Elevate conference, and brought in all kinds of world-class speakers and others. So what was the most important message you wanted to get across at that conference, and were you successful doing so?
Yeah. Well, first, I mean, now that we're talking about it, I mean, a quick, plug that, we're looking to host that conference annually. So, if anybody in your audience knows anybody that might be interested in speaking or wants to speak themselves, we'd love to hear from them. But we launched Elevate to put a spotlight on healthcare operations. It's not an area of healthcare that really gets much attention, and honestly, it had nothing to do with Medallion, in the sense that, like, we were not promoting our own products. With more than 50% of our team, having a healthcare ops background prior to Medallion, and from what we've heard from our customers, healthcare operations has been pretty tucked away and kind of left in the
Mm.
back office to do the work that is literally the key to having a successful healthcare company. And so we saw that they were lacking a community and a place where they could come and learn from other operators. And so for us, that was our real goal, and we were, I think, successful, and had an amazing turnout, and had hundreds of folks attend, and we heard really great feedback from the audience and our panelists. And so yeah, we're really excited about the future of our Elevate conference, and definitely plan on holding it next year. And yeah.
I think that's important. Like this idea of community, that's what we've been missing, especially the last couple of years of COVID, right? And so people are hungry for community. And I think it's really powerful how you've thought about how would you become thought leader in a space, and especially in a space that, to your point, healthcare operations, it's not sexy. In fact, it's like super boring and it's arcane, and like, there's these Luddites, like anti-technology. There's all kinds of stuff like working against it. And it's like the most important stuff that has to happen in order for healthcare providers to operate at the highest and best use of their leadership and license and do what they need to do. So I think that's, so it feels like that's super powerful. And one of the speakers that I think I read about was John Prince, the president and COO of Optum Healthcare. Did he do a talk something on like the future of healthcare?
Yeah.
So Derek, like, pull back the curtain, man. What is the future of healthcare?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't profess to know the answer. I don't know that anybody does. I think certainly John Prince probably has definitely a more informed view than I do, and so it was great to have him on. I think for starters, virtual care is absolutely going to be a key component of the future of healthcare. It's I think innovation is only going to continue from here. Not only is it more cost effective than in-person care, but it's also shown to improve patient health when used in the right way. And of course, it makes care more equitable and accessible to 89% of U.S. adults, according to HBR. And so, if I had to guess, in the next few years, we're going to see pretty massive innovation there, from more patient monitoring tools at home to AI incorporated into telehealth platforms. The basics of a physical appointment have to be covered at home. So, think temperature checks, weight and height measurements, heart rate, things. Obviously, that can't be done virtually, at least not today, in a way that I think makes sense to patients. And that doesn't mean that making patients. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have to have all that equipment in their home. And there are companies even that we work with that make that process actually fairly easy through at-home visits. But I think that the second real component of the future of healthcare is really to make it better for the provider. At the very start of it all, right? Education is super expensive. They're going through medical school or intensive training, and it's costly. Then it costs to get a license. It costs to get the fingerprints for the license, notaries, continuing education courses. There's just so many things that all get folded in, and it adds up. And so then you also add in the time that they don't spend on patient care, right? The 50% of admin work that I was mentioning before, that's a real reason why we're having record burnout rates amongst providers, and then therefore severe staffing shortages. There've been all sorts of studies and analyses done that over the coming years we're going to have bigger and bigger nurse shortages, and this is a real problem. And of course, it was just only exacerbated in terms of burnout by COVID. And what I say is that COVID taught us these providers, the ones committed to providing care for their patients, they're out there risking their lives for all of us, and ultimately they deserve better in terms of how we're able to enable them to do their work. And so obviously that's Medallion's core focus and mission.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's recency bias makes it easy to sort of write off burnout. The last couple of years have been hard through COVID, and especially for frontline healthcare providers. But this is a trend that's been going on for years now, well pre-COVID. And I think you're exactly right. Like if we don't confront and put a variety of systems in place and innovate on how we make healthcare better for the provider, there's no way we can make it better for the patient, right? So that feels powerful. But what's success for you personally, Derek, in 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years is a long time. Yeah, I mean, I think number one is obviously running Medallion, seeing it succeed. I mean, one would like to see the success of Medallion for our team and for our investors and for everybody that's supported us, um, and of course, just to have our overall impact in the healthcare ecosystem, um, and be positive and be able to drive dramatic amounts of efficiency and connectedness in healthcare across really all parts of the ecosystem. So yeah, obviously the area that we care the most about at Medallion today is network operations and provider data and the automation and streamlining of those workflows. But over time, I mean, we're at a 10-year period is a very long time. I think that we hope to be able to tackle not just those areas, but really they're just a broader administrative problem. And yeah, I think for better or worse, success for myself is pretty tied at this point to success of Medallion, and so. Yeah, and then I think otherwise, just I think success looks like having a happy and healthy family and friends, and I think you can't ask for too much more than that.
Oh man, dude. Well, what's one thing, Derek, that entrepreneurs should start doing? One thing they should stop doing?
Um, yeah, good question. I mean, maybe I'll just talk about things that I'm trying to work on. I think one is that I think I've learned a lot about executive team and just like how to think about that. And so I think one thing I guess to start or stop doing, depending on how it's going for each individual, is to just really focus on those relationships um, and especially in the hiring process, to really diligence whether you think you can spend a lot of time with them, right? That's a filter, right? Like, there has to be a filter in the interview process. Is, do you feel like this you're compatible with this person in terms of being able to spend a lot of time with them. So things like how they communicate, um, you know, um, just their demeanor, and like how affable are they? Do they match your energy level well? I think those are things that don't often get talked about, and it's a lesson that I think you learn on the job from seeing working relationships that work really, really well and are very, very fruitful and productive, and ones that definitely don't. And
Mm.
of course, there's a competency aspect to it, and you can make a mistake and hire somebody that's just not competent and doesn't know their stuff. But there's a lot of other dimensions too that I think interviewing sometimes doesn't pick up on. Um, at least not the traditional interviews of I have this set of questions and I'm going to go and ask them and look for this answer. That stuff's important, but that's the competency piece. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to be thought about as well. So I think that's one, and then I think the other one is actually just what we talked about earlier, which is to try and really, as much as possible, maintain an even kind of um, emotional posture. And
Mm.
it's some advice I got actually from um, one of the folks that actually brought us into Y Combinator with my last company, who was early at Yahoo, and he just gave some remarks that it's kind of like a roller coaster, and you can go up and down and up and down, and to the extent that you can keep be more level, I think it's helpful just for emotional sanity and enjoying the ride, and just being productive and doing your best work. So yeah, I think that's those are maybe a couple things.
Nice, man. Well, hey, Derek, where can people find you online?
LinkedIn is probably the best. I've got a Twitter, but I don't really use that much.
Right on, man. I'll drop LinkedIn and your Twitter handle in the show notes, and
Cool.
certainly link to Medallion, and for ABA providers, especially sort of smaller, medium ones. Check out Element as well, where we are. Man, what you're doing, what Medallion's doing, is the future. So, you ready for the hot take questions, Derek?
I hope so.
Hope is all we can ask for. All right, you're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
Um, Man, that's a tough one. Uh, I don't know. Maybe this is a bit of a cop out answer, but I think being remembered for making a positive difference in the world. I feel like humans have a tendency to want to, be liked. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess that'd be mine.
Heck yeah, man. What's your most important self-care practice?
It's probably tied with exercising and getting time with my friends and family. That would probably be it.
Do you have a favorite song?
I'll say "Over the Rainbow."
The ukulele version from Hawaii.
With the ukulele, yeah.
One of my buddies got married in Hawaii, and there was that song played, and there was not a dry eye in the house. If you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, Derek, what would it be?
I think it'd be to exercise more, actually. But interestingly, I think the opposite problem that most people have is just that I've got a very high metabolism, and I think I've lost 10 pounds, and I think become a lot weaker than I was. I used to play a lot of sports and stuff in college and high school, and I definitely don't anymore. And so I think that would probably be it, because I feel like it's healthier.
For sure, dude. Well, you could only wear one style of footwear. What would it be?
I pretty much only wear one style of footwear now, so I think this one's easy, which is Nike running shoes. That's my go-to.
Back to the basics. And for anyone who has not read Shoe Dog, which is
yes, actually, funny enough, I have this right here.
Stop it! I shit you not, listeners. This was zero planned that I was going to drop Shoe Dog. It is one of the greatest autobiographies of all time. Whether or not you like Nike or sports or shoes, that journey that Phil Knight had was phenomenal and emotional. There's so much good in that book.
Yeah.
Hey, Derek, thanks so much. It was awesome having you on the pod. I appreciate you sharing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
What up, listeners? Hey, I got something for you. If you like my Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast, you're going to love the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. So I recently met Matt at ABAI, and let me tell you, I was just an instant fanboy. Matt's the real deal. His pod is all about stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. So session 191 on his pod is on the behavior analysis of lying. That's right, lying. How awesome is that? Who does that? He also talks social skills, ACT, FAs, and so much more. His guests include Greg Hanley, Jonathan Tarbox, and other legendary names in our field. And as a BCBA, you can even get CEU credits through Behavioral Observations. You can find Matt and the Behavioral Observations podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast channel. Enjoy, friends.
Thanks for listening to Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. We value your feedback. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Element RCM.ai.